Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
I want to introduce our guest for today, Tabitha Bonilla, class of 2007, who's a research assistant professor at Northwestern University. And today's topic will be identity framing and Black Lives Matter. Professor Bonilla is an assistant professor of human development and social policy and faculty fellow at the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern University. Bonilla's research studies political behavior and communication and broadly examines how elite communication influences voter opinions of candidates and of political policies. Her work focuses on how messaging can both polarize attitude and bridge attitudinal divides. We'll post her full bio in the chat right now. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Professor Bonilla. And if we could start just by telling us your reaction to the movements of the spring and summer's events and how you're thinking about these things in light of your research.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take just a second to share my screen before I forget how to do that. All right, I think that's working. Yeah, so thanks so much for inviting me here. I'm thrilled to be a part of the MIT Equity Forum and to be able to talk about my work in conjunction with what happened this spring and this summer. I think just to situate myself just a little bit as well, my research agenda focuses on how the public understands elite communication and how the public forms attitudes or acts based on these events. So I'm trained as a political scientist, and my work gives me some purchase into the way we think about political psychology and communication and how these things come together to form opinions on political psychology. And so I think the spring and summer was difficult in a lot of ways for a lot of people. And we saw a similar consistent focus from Black Lives Matter pushing against violence against Black people. We saw organization around the vigilante shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. We saw perceptions of negligence with respect to the arrest of the men responsible. We also saw the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of the police. And I think beyond the actions directly related to these individuals, we also saw further development of the movement's attempts to move beyond the discussions of violence and Black men. And so we saw this very clearly in discussions of Breonna Taylor and demands for justice, not as quick to speak her name or as frequently speaking her name as for those of George Floyd. And I think these discussions speak a little bit to what the movement means and for whom within the Black community that the movement is meaningful. But I think we also saw continued development of the movement along policy lines. So while I don't think we'll see universal agreement about what it means, I do think we see much more united calls for abolishing the police than we had seen prior to the spring and summer. And I think we've even seen some policy movement in localities that actually work to do this. So I think finally, one thing we saw this spring and summer with online discussions and particularly with the pandemic in full swing in the United States is that we saw social media being able to highlight a lot of the violence that occurs for unnamed people and the disproportionate harms that have been inflicted on the Black community. And I think social media has really been a forum to draw particular attention to these pockets of the community, as Black Lives Matter has often continued to do. And I think all of these things are really important with my work in a whole, and particularly my work on Black Lives Matter. So my latest article that was published this summer with Al Chillery asked about Black Lives Matter and identity framing within the movement. And it speaks to how the Black public conceptualizes the movement as a whole. So I think to understand my work here, I'll first talk a little bit about the development of the movement itself and the goal of its founders, and then explain why we thought identity framing was a particularly important piece when we talk about Black Lives Matter and the mobilization of the Black public around Black Lives Matter. And then I'll talk about an experiment that we did on Black Lives Matter and wrap up with some thoughts on what this teaches us about mobilizing support for social movements, and specifically how difficult the work of the founders of Black Lives Matter has been. So we first see the hashtag Black Lives Matter in August 2012, tweeted by Marcus Anthony Hunter, who's an urban studies scholar at UCLA. But the hashtag doesn't begin to go viral until Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi posted it on July 13th, 2013, to protest a jury's decision to acquit George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. In the years since this viral post, Black Lives Matter has been tweeted more than 35 million times, making it one of the 3 most used hashtags on the Twitter platform. They describe their mission to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities. But also, through combating and countering acts of violence, Black Lives Matter hopes to create space for Black imagination and innovation and to center Black joy. Obviously, this movement's critical to understanding the virtue of the work that it seeks to undertake, its prominence within public discourse, and also the way that it's shifted public attention and even pushed policy changes. For political scientists, the movement is also incredibly interesting because it operates distinctly from the way that other movements have operated in the past. This means that there's a lot of work in the academic communities thinking about the ways that Black Lives Matter compares to the civil rights movements of the 1960s and before. So older social movements contain very strong leadership models that were centralized and top-down approaches. This means that the messaging and the physical action, such as protests like lunch counter sit-ins and bus boycotts, were targeted and facilitated by central leadership. Resource mobilization was also aimed at very specific policy goals. And there's a handful of examples of newer social movements that include Germany's anti-nuclear movement and the Occupy movement, but Black Lives Matter is the most visible and prominent of these new types. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think the audio was chopping up a little bit. You might be able to
maybe I'll shut off my screen.
Video.
Yeah, okay. Let me know if it doesn't get better. We good?
We'll do.
All right, thanks for letting me know.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, so one of the key differences, though, between these newer social movements and the older social movements is a strong online presence and the use of social media platforms to disseminate their messages. Along with this, while these movements clearly have founders, they've also used decentralized leadership models, which means that different pieces of the organization may orchestrate different messages and different actions. So we can also expect Black Lives Matter activists to spend more time on the politics of signification, which seeks to create a space for and represent their distinctive identities. I think it's also important to recognize as well that while Black Lives Matter continues to shift and expand and develop over the course of time, we are seeing much clearer policy demands, although we're not necessarily seeing changes in the centralization of leadership movements. All right. So the question that our research asks is, what do these differences and new social movements mean for Black Lives Matter? And does the new social movement system change how the movement is understood and described when talked about by the public and by leaders of the movement who curate these conversations? And finally, how do these changes matter both for public interpretation of the organization, but also for support for the movement and mobilization around the organization change as public interpretation differs? This is especially salient for Black Lives Matter, as this movement has a unique attention to recognizing critical distinctions within Black communities throughout the United States, and the ways that those different communities have experienced prior activism and distinctions and discrimination in general. Alicia Garza, who's pictured here, and is one of the co-founders of the movement, describes the movement this way. Black Lives Matter is a unique contribution that goes beyond extrajudicial killings of Black people by police and vigilantes. It goes beyond the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some Black communities, which merely calls on Black people to love Black, live Black, and buy Black, keeping straight cis Black men in the front of the movement, while our sisters, queer and trans and disabled folk take up roles in the background or not at all. Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. It centers those who have been marginalized by Black liberation movements. What Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors identify through their writings on Black Lives Matter is centralizing the concept of intersectionality within the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm going to briefly pause on Black Lives Matter to talk about how intersectionality matters from an identity perspective, because this is a critical piece of what Black Lives Matter is fighting for, at least in the founders' perspectives. So intersectionality has long been a part of civil rights social movements. We see it in the Combahee River Collective, in Audre Lorde's writings, we see it in Chicanismo movements, and a brief shout out today is Google Doodle, who highlights some of this activism. We see it in academic spaces though, where the term intersectionality grows out of a rich tradition of Black feminist thought, and the term is coined by Martha Crenshaw in the 1980s, even though many scholars have been speaking to this for quite some time. Intersectionality theory recognizes that marginalized individuals exist and experience their racial, gender, sexual, and class identities concurrently. This means that interconnected forms of disadvantage exist for those who identify as part of marginalized groups across multiple identities, and this form of discrimination is unique to those with overlapping or intersectional identities, as first defined and described and documented among African American women. The corollary of this idea is that marginalized individuals must confront what Collins calls interlocking systems of oppression based on their class, gender, race, and sexual identities. Sarah Jackson has conducted research examining Black Lives Matter activists and has also confirmed their commitment to intersectional messaging. She writes that Black Lives Matter's organizational founders and members of the larger movement for Black Lives Collective have insisted on discourses of intersectionality that value and center all Black lives, including, among others, Black women, femmes, and queer and trans folk. Despite these stated commitments from Black Lives Matter activists, Shatima Threadcraft has noted that Black female and LGBTQ+ victims have received less attention in the movement's condemnations of state violence and rituals of public mourning. Separately, my co-author Al Tillery has examined tweets between December 1st, 2015 and December 31st, 2016, and found that the modal tweet was an emotional response that included expressions of sadness, outrage, and despair to police brutality and the killings of African Americans. But he also found that Black Lives Matter organizations generated more tweets that framed the movement as a struggle for individual rights rather than than ones that use frames about gender, racial, and LGBTQ identities. And we see this very visibly in public spaces as well. So the hashtag Say Her Name stems from a reminder that Black women are subject to police violence as well. The hashtag Black Trans Lives Matter reminds us that Black trans individuals face incredibly high levels of violence generally. So the question we ask then is, what do these differences between leadership and public responses mean for Black Lives Matter? Specifically, we're focused on what work recognizing intersectionality does within the Black Lives Matter movement. Does it mobilize subgroups within Black communities such as women or LGBTQ+ identifiers? We know that group consciousness grounded in gender identity can be a potent mobilizer of women's participation in both social movements and electoral politics. Public opinion polls have also found that African American women demonstrated a higher commitment to feminist values than did white women, and feminist consciousness drives African American women to heightened levels of engagement, participation, and substantive representation in politics of the African American community. Similarly, Black LGBTQ+ work within Black social movements. That work is not new, as Audre Lorde describes how the existence of Black lesbian and gay people was not even allowed to cross the public consciousness of Black America in the 1960s. Similarly, now, conversations around the Black LGBTQ+ community continue to be much less represented in discussions of Black Lives Matter. It is possible then that intersectional messages mobilize Black women or Black LGBTQ+ identifiers as they more directly recognize these communities within the movement. But within this paper, we're also curious about how Black men and non-LGBTQ+ identifiers respond to these messages. In some studies, we see Black male respondents being equally, and in some cases more likely than Black women to support Black feminism. So it's possible that African American men will also show a positive response to a gender identity frame. However, Evelyn Simeon also finds that despite abstract commitments to gender equality, African American men that she studied had a difficult time accepting the premise that gender discrimination was as big of a problem as racial discrimination for African American women. She theorized that it is more difficult for Black men to uphold the Black feminist position because they must consider whether Black women experience sexism within the Black movement. Similarly, in her landmark study of the HIV/AIDS crisis in Black America, Kathy Cohen argues that the LGBTQ+ African Americans were frequently hyper-marginalized within their communities because establishment leaders did not do enough to frame their issues as central to the broader movement. Thus, it's possible that intersectional messages could also demobilize segments of the African American community. So to examine these questions, I designed an experiment that we embedded on a survey of a sample that is representative of Black residents within the United States. We fielded this study last year from February 15th to 23rd to 845 subjects across the United States. Subjects were first asked a series of demographic questions and the extent of their knowledge about Black Lives Matter. They were then randomly assigned to read one of 4 treatment messages, which they were asked to read. We then asked them several questions about their support for Black Lives Matter, their perceptions of the movement's effectiveness, and their trust for the movement. So the experimental treatments can be divided into 2 types of messages: those that describe a unified goal within Black communities, and those that describe intersectional goals and recognize the marginalization of specific subgroups within Black communities in the United States. The unifying treatments are presented here on this slide. The first message we treat is a control message, as it reads the most generally about Black Lives Matter. It reads, "Black Lives Matter was created in response to the sustained and increasingly visible violence against Black communities in the US. They believe in elevating the experiences of Black people as American citizens with constitutional rights. They are intentional about amplifying the particular experience of violence Black people face." The remaining treatments repeat much of the same information. The second treatment, the Black National treatment, tries to draw a much stronger message around Black Lives Matter's mission by repeating the first sentence from the first treatment and then highlighting their work to elevate the experiences of Black people as a distinct nation within a nation through an ongoing call and struggle for reparations for the historic and continuing harms of colonialism and slavery, and highlight a struggle for self-determination. The intersectional treatment similarly repeat the first sentence of the first treatment and then highlight the struggles of the particular communities that they speak to. The Black feminist treatment describes the mission as elevating the experiences of the most marginalized Black people, especially women, and speaks to Black Lives Matter as amplifying the particular experience of gendered violence that Black women face. The Black LGBTQ+ treatment speaks to the mission as elevating the experiences of the most marginalized Black people, especially those who identify as queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex. Again, it particularly speaks to Black Lives Matter intentionally amplifying the experience of non-heteronormative violence that Black LGBTQ+ individuals face. There are a lot of takeaways from this work, but one of the central things that we found was that within the sample, there was perhaps unsurprisingly incredibly high levels of familiarity and support for the Black Lives Matter movement. This figure shows responses to the questions of how familiar subjects were with Black Lives Matter. Along the x-axis here, we see the 4 possible responses ranging from never heard of it to have extensive knowledge of it, and on the y-axis we have the number of responses that we received. The sample mean is indicated by this dashed line here, and so you can see in this question the mean and modal response was that respondents understood Black Lives Matter, followed by nearly a third of the sample saying they had extensive knowledge of Black Lives Matter. Respondents were also highly supportive of Black Lives Matter. So similarly, on the y-axis, we see the number of respondents, while on the x-axis, we see support ranging from individuals who strongly opposed it to individuals who strongly supposed Black Lives Matter. Here, the modal response was that respondents strongly supported the movement, though the mean response was that respondents supported the movement. Finally, respondents were highly trusting of the goals of Black Lives Matter. Here, the responses along the x-axis range from not at all trusting of the movement to very trusting of Black Lives Matter. And again, the modal response was that individuals very much trusted the movement, and nearly 80% of the sample was moderately or highly trusting of the movement. When we examine support for the movement as a result of our treatment conditions, we see a couple of really important differences. First, I just want to note that I'm reporting results here based on a male-female gender split, and I want to fully recognize that gender expression is not a binary construct, but unfortunately, because of the sampling techniques that were available to us for this work, we're unable to do a sufficient statistical analysis on our sample here. So I'm showing in this slide the treatment effects of messages for 4 different measures of support for Black Lives Matter on the y-axis for Black men within our sample. I'll be happy to go more in depth for the statistical methods if people really want to in the Q&A, but just simply for brevity here, this figure is displaying the effect of the nationalist, feminist, and LGBTQ+ messages compared to the control message. So the point estimates here are estimates of that difference in effect against the control, and then the band is the 95% confidence interval. Intervals that don't overlap with this 0 line here indicate that the message differed in a meaningful way from the control. So what we see here is that Black men who received the feminist and LGBTQ+ messages were less likely to indicate support for Black Lives Matter, and these differences result in 6 and 9 percentage point shifts in support respectively. Additionally, while we thought that the Black nationalist treatment would elevate support, it generally had no effect on Black male respondents. In contrast, when we look at the Black female respondents in our sample, we see a completely different result. So this figure here is now looking at Black female responses, and we see that Black women were no more or less likely to support Black Lives Matter if they received the feminist, LGBTQ+, or the Black nationalist treatment. While men were generally less supportive as a result of intersectional messages, women were demonstrated a similar level of support across all of the treatments and were no more likely to be mobilized by a feminist treatment that spoke directly to the particular violence that Black women might face. We also asked respondents if they were willing to write a letter in support of Black Lives Matter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Just over half of our sample, 448 subjects, complied with this by writing a letter. Most letters were quite short, so as this figure is showing along the x-axis the length of the message, the mean number of characters was just over 100, and the longest was about 1,200 characters. Here we didn't see responses in the likeliness of whether a respondent would write a letter or not. We also did not see people who received the intersectional treatment specifically discussing the groups that we talked about within that intersectional Black Lives Matter message. We did, however, see that the content of the message shifted based on the treatments. Female respondents were much more likely to mention policing when they received the nationalist treatment, and male respondents were much more likely to mention disparities within the Black community when they received the nationalist treatment. Male respondents were also less likely to write about support of the movement if they received the feminist and LGBTQ+ conditions. They were also more likely to write shorter messages if they received the LGBTQ+ condition. Interestingly, one critical difference we were able to reserve for the small number of LGBTQ+ identifiers within our sample was that they were marginally more likely to write a message if they received the LGBTQ+ treatment, but that the message would be shorter if they received the nationalist or the LGBTQ message. I think there are 3 critical points that we learn about opinions surrounding Black Lives Matter and Black politics as a result of this study. First, no matter what demographic group or treatment I look at in the data, on average support for Black Lives Matter is incredibly high and remains high across all the communities within our Black respondents. The slight depression we see in Black male support, while significant and for critical understanding Black public opinion, does not in any way indicate disaffection for the movement. It signals that Black men are less likely to be activated by particular messages, and we're still working on understanding why that is. It could be generalized differences in socialization of Black individuals by gender, or it could be, as we saw earlier, because Black men grapple with intersectionality differently than do Black women, or something else. Second, I think this study speaks to the difficulty of navigating online or decentralized social justice movements. The control of the message and the content in the message is much harder when different communities, both ideologically and geographically situated, may highlight different pieces of the message. And while they share collective ideals, those messages and subsequent actions can be interpreted differently. To students of social movements, I think there are implications here for what it means to effectively communicate within new social movements. Finally, I think this study highlights just how much work the founders of Black Lives Matter and other Black queer feminist leaders are doing and how difficult the work that is. Intersectionality is not a simple concept, and it's not something that everyone is familiar with. The general public may not quite understand what intersectionality means or why it needs to be highlighted. Also, portions of the public, and not just the Black public, may not agree that intersectionality matters in a real way, and that has implications for social movements or social policy. Leaders of Black Lives Matter, and even in historical movements, are doing two forms of education here. First, they're educating about social experiences that Black communities face to outside communities, but they're also doing education within and without Black communities as to how particular Black communities experience multiple burdens. The dual focus visibly means that uptake of the intersectional aspect of the message can be slightly lower, but it also has implications for mobilization that we see here. All right, just before I close out for questions, I just want to highlight again my co-author, Al Tillery, who I'm continuing to work with to understand perceptions of intersectionality within social movements, but also on other work looking at the most recent Black female nominee for vice president. I also want to acknowledge the Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy for funding on this project, and my former student, Skylar Patterson, for her research assistance on this project. So thanks again for the MIT Equity Forum for hosting me, and to Corban for moderating. So I'll turn it back to you, Corban.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. And yeah, I really appreciated kind of everything you spoke to, as I've been kind of engaging in some of these intersectional ideas in myself and trying to, as a Black man, unpack those things as it relates to gender, queerness, etc. But I think for our audience, the first thing I'd like to ask is if maybe you could, I know you went through it in the talk, but just kind of do a, maybe through an example, a breakdown of what intersectionality kind of means, like maybe for an example person. And then coming from that, yeah, we can start there.
Sure. Yes, so intersectionality, I think, really speaks to the fact that the way that Black women experience the world will be different than the way that Black men do. But it also means that the way that Black women experience racial discrimination will be slightly different from that of Black men, but it also means that the way that they experience gender discrimination will differ from that of white women. And so I should have the Martha Crenshaw's example ready to go, but she walks through an example of employment and how there are particular employment regulations made to encourage both Black individuals in a particular company and white women to join. And she found that just because of the way that Black women were integrated into this company, neither of those regulations actually spoke to Black women and their experiences. And so what she saw was a was a rise in women within that company and a rise of Black men, but no change in which those institutional changes helped Black women. I think for what it means for, if we would translate this to police violence, and to what we've seen some of the discussions within the Black Lives Matter movement, and particularly where Say Her Name comes from, is I think if you, and this is something that I kind of tuned into because of the work that I had done on this paper, but if you listen to, news on what was going on in the spring, a lot of the discussion and description about protests were that these were all in response to George Floyd. And only recently did you see descriptions about Breonna Taylor. So there's also, I think, probably unintentional silencing of saying the names of some of these Black women who we know have also been harmed. I think the last thing that it can also speak to, and I think this is what the hashtag Black Trans Lives Matter tries to do, is to recognize that sometimes different segments of the community are more prone to certain types of harm. So the type of harm that Black trans women experience is a unique type of sexualized and violence and fetishization, and I think it also can go ignored. I think the percentages of Black trans women that are harmed by police is actually one of the highest of community members, and yet that statistic isn't necessarily the first thing that people talk about. So I think that's kind of the work that intersectionality is trying to do within this movement, is to draw attention to the fact that even within the Black community, it's not a monolith. There are a lot of different experiences and types of harms.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think coming from that, we have a question from Robert, essentially asking if we have the Black Lives Matter approach, is this intersectional approach? I guess in a way, is that exclusive of having clear and direct specific actions to call for? How does that relate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's two pieces here that we're kind of really speaking to. One is the fact that Black Lives Matter as a social movement looks very differently from a lot of other social movements. And then the other piece is that Black Lives Matter has this intersectional message that is not necessarily trying to speak to the community as a monolith, but to also recognize distinctions within the community. So I think both things create difficult pieces of the movement and the message for different reasons. So I think one of the things that's recognized about the new social movements is that, particularly with Black Lives Matter, is with this decentralized leadership model, different segments of Black Lives Matter can talk about the movement differently. They can advance different message. They can advance different goals. I think even if you want to do a search of what abolish the police means, you'll find different answers within different circles. And I think the new social movement aspect is that there isn't this really strong top-down centralized control of the message that we saw in the 1960s. And so that introduces the room for people to kind of create messages of their own within this overarching umbrella movement. But the intersectionality piece is a vehicle for which this can happen. So if you're not familiar with intersectionality, or you don't agree with it, or that's not the modal type of violence that you're aware of, you just may not be mentioning it. And so that's, I think that then relates to the message just getting kind of lost in the bigger picture of what people understand.
Thank you. I think this is a question of my own, and I guess it's a matter of, with the work that you engage in, studying these things, looking at policy, looking at communication, in what ways do you try to bridge kind of your hypothesis and survey work into kind of engaging with the people that you're actually looking at, and advocating changes in material conditions in local communities with Black folks, etc. Like, what does that look like to kind of bridge between those for you?
Yeah, I think that's such a hard and important question, I think, for researchers, particularly those who aren't a part of the community in which they're researching. I wanted to say that, a lot of my attentiveness to this has really been to try and talk to people who are in the community. Al Tillery definitely, as a Black man is. And I think it's really vital that I engage with Black scholars in this work to try and understand, like, if this is also the way that they're reading and understanding the work. But I think the bridge between the academy and activism is the harder bridge to cross, because I think we just have different sets of expertise. I know how to textbook academically activate people, but they're the ones on the ground who are in the communities doing the work, engaging with folks, hearing the stories, calling the protests. And so I'm hopeful that this work helps to shine a light on just how difficult the work that they're doing is. I hope that it can be helpful for them as they think about the ways that they construct their messages. I think at this point, I'm not directly involved with activist leaders on this issue to try and construct these messages. I think that in some ways is like the academic step back. But at the same time, I do think it makes me be more attentive of the things that are going on in the issues, right? Watching in the spring and the fall, in the summer, like, what are people doing online around this issue? How are they mobilizing? What are their responses to help protect the communities who are harmed as a result of their protest? How do we pay for bail? How are these things happening, and what do the movements look like? So I hope that it gives me greater attentiveness to what's going on.
Thank you.
Can I answer this question by John Gibbs?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Hi, John. We were in the same dorm. Okay, so he's asking if I think the religious affiliation of the respondents matters. He asked because the belief system of the Black church, previously part of the centralized movement, would likely align with the nationalist viewpoint, but less so with the LGBTQ plus or feminist viewpoint. Compliments on observing and exploring the contrast between the decentralized leadership of now and the centralized movement in previous decades is really intriguing. Okay, so John brings up a really important point, and the role of the Black church within Black activism continues to this day. It is a strong central organizing point of Black communities throughout the civil rights movement earlier, but it still is, even I think on the ground movements. And there's some really cool grad student work here at Northwestern thinking about how this works. Interestingly, here, we didn't see religion playing that big of a role, and in some cases operated oppositely what we thought it would have. So I actually think it positively mattered for the feminist messaging, and I think in some cases negatively mattered for LGBTQ, but not strongly, and it wasn't consistent. So I think it was pretty surprising. I think this speaks a little bit to how familiar the respondents were and how highly supportive they were of Black Lives Matter, which I think is, one of the biggest central points of this is that even though we see differences in activation among our respondents, like Black Lives Matter really does meaningful work that isn't universal, but provides a strong united front among a lot of Black respondents.
I think we have a question from Wendell asking, I guess kind of broadly, how can the belief gap between the Black Lives Matter supporters and white liberals how can that be closed?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know. I do think, so interestingly, we fielded this exact same study on white respondents, and we saw no changes in support based on any of these messages. We saw much lower support for Black Lives Movement as a whole. In fact, whereas the mean support for Black Lives Matter was like something like 80% or 85% of the sample for Blacks. For whites, it was like 45% or something. That said, that was a year ago. I think this summer we've seen a lot higher support by white people. I think in June was the first time that Black Lives Matter was viewed more favorably by white people than it was viewed unfavorably. So we are seeing white opinion moving on what Black Lives Matter does. But I think here we're talking about centuries of anti-Black thought that have been ingrained into our political system and institutions. So, that's hard. I don't think we really know how, beyond, consistently trying to educate and bring awareness to these issues.
I think, let's see.
I can answer this one from Tom B.
Okay.
So you wanted to know why only Black responds to Black Lives Matter messaging? What might others be thinking? So the first thing, I think in this, the Black respondents were the most important just within this study of trying to understand what intersectionality does, because we could talk about who within a particular community intersectionality might be speaking to and who it wouldn't. So in this case, that gives us, a strong lens into, Black women and a tiny lens into Black LGBTQ plus identifiers. They're not much. We did, as I said, we did look at this on a white sample as well. And we haven't published those results yet because we're still trying to understand precisely what intersectionality is doing for people with whom they share no piece of the movement, right? Black Lives Matter really is for Black people, and it's to educate those of us who aren't Black, but it's really to try and draw attention to their needs and what's going on there. And so I think that's why we focused on Black people. I do think, I do have ongoing work thinking about the way that we might see intra-group collaborations happening. And so, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have more answers there soon.
I think a couple of questions kind of got toward this, but I think, and we've seen this in the media as well, a distinction between Black Lives Matter as a sentence, right, as just a statement, and then blacklivesmatter.org as kind of the organization, the movement. And with respect to the work you do looking at these communications and hashtags, how do you, how does that make a difference for the way that people render their support and the way the movement gets kind of pushed forward?
Sure. Yeah, I think this kind of speaks to the difficulty of the decentralized leadership structure. That there are a lot of leaders who say they're affiliated with Black Lives Matter, and that can mean very different things. But it also means that there's a lot of hashtag activism around this that's all online. I think there's clearly a Black Lives Matter entity and organization that's doing work. But I think the way my co-author says this is really nice, is that they have kind of appointed themselves as curators of this discussion and not necessarily leaders of or guiders of a movement other than curating the discussion. And so there's this sense at which there are two things happening here. There's this online presence that is really seeking to expand our minds with the way we talk about things and the way we learn about them and what we can understand. But then there's this, actual physical presence, and the two things are a little bit distinct, and it's kind of difficult to sort through them. So hopefully I answered that right.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's I guess I'll end with one question just kind of surrounding MIT. So I've, as the past organizer or admin and co-chair of the Black Graduate Association, we've done a lot of work trying to do some of the supporting Black lives kind of on campus at MIT. With the recent petition that we put forth, which I can put the link in the chat. And so I guess how can alumni engage and informed by your own maybe engagement with movements at Northwestern's campus, what do you think the Black Lives Matter can do, and can we push forth in the academic sphere or as students, alumni, teaching professors, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the students here at Northwestern have been organizing really strongly about race issues separately, but also about race issues in conjunction with how the university has worked with student populations based on coronavirus. They're also mobilizing really strongly about our campus police force. So there's just a ton of activism right now, and I think there's been some work talking about how one of the unique features of this pandemic has been, by isolating people, also given them space to think through these things and push out on these particular issues. So I think there's physical policy changes that need to happen. And I think that's tough. And I think, within my own university, it's hard to know where the role to play is, just because part of the difficulty of coronavirus is also disenfranchising, like disconnecting us from each other. But I also think there's work to be done within scholarship. I think and this will be disciplinary in content, but I know within my discipline, there's a lot of emphasis on different aspects of American politics and siloing of Black politics as its own, special thing. And I think one of the things that I try to do in my research is really to reach across and say that this is critical to understanding American politics. It's critical to understanding in this moment, but also, in past history. And so hopefully by increasing awareness generally, we can also start to think about the ways in which our research matters differently within different populations, because I think that it does. And I think that is not a disciplinarily bound concept. But I think the other piece of social movements that is difficult to grapple with, specifically with students, is that there's the changes that rise because of them are slow to happen, and then when they happen, they can kind of happen all at once. And I think with the student population, part of the difficulty is you tend to have a very limited time in a particular place. Yeah, which I have in other instances seen used against students, right? Students will bring something up in the spring, and the administration will be like, we'll talk about that in the fall. And then the issue goes away because now a quarter of the population that cared about that issue is no longer present. So I think there are particular difficulties with students and activism, even if the issues that they're speaking to are really the same issues that are being spoken to, generally and broadly across society. But I also have to say that I feel like the students, at least here at Northwestern, I think this is true at MIT, are really thought and visionary leaders of where the movements can go. And so I think one of the things that we've seen in Black Lives Matter too is that it's been a very young group of leaders taking control and pushing things forward. So just to say, like, go students, like, they're the ones that we're going to be following as this continues.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like the point you said within your own scholarship of kind of, if we want to focus on American politics and then Black politics, but I think recognizing that even what we call as American, that has a lens too, and just yes. All of these things are contextual. So,
yes. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor
Sure.
Bonilla. On behalf of the Alumni Association, I just want to thank all the attendees for tuning into the MIT Forum for Equity broadcast. And again, thank you for joining us. Special note, this is the first of many events kind of under this series to be convened by the MIT Alumni Association. If you have any ideas for topics or speakers in this series or any other feedback, please reach out to alumnilearn@mit.edu. To the alumni, we'll be sure to forward any and all questions via the Q&A to our speaker today. And the alumni office staff is going to keep the chat open for another 15 minutes after we kind of log off. This broadcast will be available on the MIT Alumni Association YouTube channel within a week. And I guess, Professor, I'll give you, if you want to have a last word or share anything, go ahead.
I feel like I've said a lot of things, but I just thank you so much, Corban, for moderating, and thank you for inviting me to share this work and have this conversation. It's been fun to be here.
Definitely. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the captioning team and to also MIT alumni for bringing all of us in. And thank you for watching to everyone.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.